Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. I am so glad you're here listening to the 362nd episode of this podcast. It'll be published on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2024. This week's episode was inspired on one of my many hikes this year on Mount Helena, here in Helena, Montana. I had just finished an engaging storytelling for sales and business workshop with a local insurance company's staff of about 8 people. I got home, changed into my hiking boots, leashed up the dog, and headed up the mountain for some fresh air. I often leave myself time like this after workshops and coaching sessions, so I can fully process an experience by taking inventory. I ask myself questions like, what went well? What was a highlight for me? What did I experience as I watched the participants interact? What would I do differently next time? I love to ask myself these questions and get inspired as I'm hiking. My heart rate went up as I gained elevation on my hike, and as I felt my head start to clear, I remembered something specific from the session. One participant mentioned a storybook from their childhood and how it shaped their values and perspectives in some ways. I grew up in a household full of books and music, and my client's comment brought me back to some of the most memorable books and movies and albums from my childhood. My dad had eclectic taste in music, from Tchaikovsky's Peter and the Wolf to ZZ Top and soundtracks to Superman and Star Wars. And I started thinking especially about the movies we watched over and over again, like Annie and Grease. As a kid and teenager, I loved the book The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. I saw myself in the tree's character, probably because it always brought me happiness to share with people, to be a problem solver and a helper. And I was so happy and touched when that book was gifted to our little family when our first son was born, until I read it out loud to my newborn baby. This was a childhood story that I loved that did not stand the test of time. The little boy character in it was a selfish jerk. I only read it the one time, and then I put it in the donation bag for the next trip to the thrift store. It wasn't until many years later that I considered that book again, along with a few other childhood favorite books and movies, Cinderella and the movie 16 Candles from the mid-'80s. As our 2 boys grew and I experienced the birth and growth of my nieces, I noticed a lot of messages in those old stories that made me very uncomfortable. Many of my favorites now bring a sour taste in my mouth, and worse. I realize I never, ever want our sons and our nieces to be exposed to some of them. Someone I have great respect for brought up the Cinderella story in a LinkedIn post many years ago with the question, can't a story just be a story? He was implying that people might have been overreacting in their, air quotes, politically correct removal of storybooks from children's libraries. He was suggesting that maybe sometimes a story can just be a story. This was around the time of the Me Too movement, and when Dr. Seuss books were being questioned, some of them being removed because of the obvious racism in them. I wanted to agree with my friend. I wanted to continue to cherish my memories of the book The Giving Tree, the story of Cinderella, and the movies Grease and 16 Candles. But I couldn't. Not after the research I've been reading for years now about the influence of stories on our identity, character, and values. Think about the stories that you read to your children in the hopes that they'll absorb some morality lessons, like Aesop's fables, maybe stories from the Bible, maybe books from your culture or your religion. Well, we can't expect children to absorb those lessons, but ignore the ones in Cinderella and the Giving Tree. It doesn't work like that. Literature is literature. According to researchers at Western Washington University, as early as pre-language ages, the stories people tell about us influence our identities. Imagine this. A child hears for many years their parents and the other adults in their lives saying things like this. "Oh, Sarah, she's always been this way. When she was a baby, she'd wake up with a big smile on her face every day. It was always such a joy, even when I'd been up all night feeding and changing her." That child is likely to continue to meet that expectation, even when she doesn't feel like it. And that can cause serious conflict. Internally, if she thinks she has to put on a smile, even when she's not feeling it, or even externally with her parents because their expectations of who she is no longer fit who she wants to be. Then there's the flip side. Start again. "She's always been this way. When she was a baby, she'd wake up with a big smile on her face every day. It was always such a joy. But her little sister, she was a nightmare to wake up in the morning. No matter what we did, she'd wake up grumpy and difficult." I'm sure you can now imagine the impact of those stories on the identities and confidence of those siblings. But what about the relationship between them? Those stories can affect that as well. Stories shape us. The stories we hear and read affect our values. They affect our identities long after childhood. They can even impact what we consider to be our authenticity. Stories shape us, even into adulthood. The stories we hear and read shape our values and our identities. They can even impact what we consider to be our authenticity. We must be more aware of the stories we're sharing about other people and about the stories we're consuming. And by consuming, I mean all of what we're consuming, including the stories shared by strangers on social media. Given this conversation in my head as I was hiking, I came up with a couple of alternative endings for the book, The Giving Tree. And I'd love for you to think about the consequences of each of these endings on identity, regardless of which character resonates with the reader. Here's the first part of the book, so if it's unfamiliar to you or it's been a long time since you read it, you'll have some context for the relationship between the two characters, the boy and the tree. Once there was a tree, and she loved a little boy. And every day the boy would come, and he would gather her leaves and make them into crowns and play king of the forest. He would climb up her trunk and swing from her branches and eat apples, and they would play hide and go seek, and when he was tired, he would sleep in her shade. And the boy loved the tree very much, and the tree was happy. As you can hear, the boy and the tree develop a close relationship. But the boy grows up, of course, and he leaves the tree for longer and longer periods of time. Through the years, he returns, and each time tells the tree what he wants for himself. And the tree gives him her apples to sell when he asks for money, her branches to cut off to build a house when he wants a family. And when it appears that his family leaves him and leaves him lonely, she tells him to take her trunk to make a boat and sail away, leaving her as a stump. Here's the original ending. "I wish that I could give you something, boy, but I have nothing left. I'm just an old stump. I'm sorry." "I don't need much, Sorry, Neil, I'm going to do this again. Here's the original ending. The tree. "I wish that I could give you something, but I have nothing left. I'm just an old stump. I'm sorry." "I don't need very much now," said the boy. "Just a quiet place to sit and rest. I am very tired." "Well," said the tree, straightening herself up as much as she could. Well, an old stump is good for sitting and resting. Come, boy, sit down. Sit down and rest. And the boy did, and the tree was happy. That's the original ending. What do you hear in the two characters in the book? The boy takes and takes and takes, and the tree gives and gives and gives. As a young girl and teenager, I didn't see a problem with this. As long as the tree was happy, it was a happy ending. Oy! But now, if I heard one of my nieces saying it was her favorite book, I'd take it from her hands and burn it. Well, maybe I wouldn't quite react that way. But I know we'd be having a serious conversation about what a healthy relationship looks and feels like, whether platonic or romantic. Hiking back down the mountain and thinking about what I'd want to say to my niece in that situation, I came up with a couple of alternative endings, and I'd like to share them with you. Alternate ending number 1 is my best case scenario for the story to offer a happier ending and a better message for people who see themselves in either of these characters. Then one day the boy came to the tree, and the tree said, "Come, boy, come and climb up my trunk and swing from my branches and eat apples and play in my shade and be happy." "I'm too big to climb and play," said the boy. "I want to buy things and have fun. I want some money. Can you give me some money?" "I'm sorry," said the tree, "but I have no money. I have only leaves and apples. Take my apples, boy, and sell them in the city. Then you will have money and you will be happy." And so the boy climbed up the tree and gathered her apples and carried them away, and the tree was happy. And the boy stayed away for a long time, and the tree was sad. And then one day the boy came back, and the tree shook with joy, and she said, "Come, boy, climb up my trunk and swing from my branches and be happy." And the boy said, "You have given me so much already, tree, and though I'm too big to climb trees, my children will love you." And his children came to see the tree, and they climbed in her branches and ate her apples, and the tree was happy. I like that ending, but I have to be honest with you. The alternate ending that I was first thinking of wasn't quite so kind. Here's the one that I thought of while hiking a few days ago, the one I think is an even better lesson for those of us who originally saw ourselves as the tree. Alternate ending number 2. Then one day the boy came to the tree, and the tree said, "Come, boy, come and climb up my trunk and swing from my branches and eat apples and play in my shade and be happy." "I'm too big to climb and play," said the boy. "I want to buy things and have fun. I want some money. Can you give me some money?" "No," said the tree, "and you're a selfish jerk. Fuck off." And so the boy left, and the tree was happy. I hope you just laughed out loud. Because as we head into a new year, it's a really good time to consider our impact on the people and environment around us, and to make an effort to be more intentional about that impact. You've heard me say many times that the stories we share about other people say a lot about who we are, and that's an important reminder when it comes to the legacy we want to leave behind. And now you'll hear another reminder. The stories we embrace and the characters we relate to say a lot about who we are as well. So again, listeners, now it's your turn. I challenge you to take inventory of a few things before you make any New Year's resolutions, before you pick a word of the year, or as you consider your goals for personal growth in 2025. Ask yourself these questions. What stories influenced my identity as a child or young adult that maybe it's time to review and consider whether they still resonate and why? What stories have I been told about myself as a child that no longer aligned with who I am or how I want to experience myself moving forward? And what evidence can I point to, recent stories, that contradict those childhood labels that no longer fit? And lastly, what stories am I continuing to share about other people, my children, my friends, and others in my community and at work, that might be contributing to negativity and division? I'd love to hear your thoughts about my alternative endings to the Shel Silverstein book, and I'd love to hear what comes up for you as you take inventory of your childhood stories. Thanks for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. I'm Sarah Elkins, and I would love to thank you for joining me for another one of these episodes. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't for you, and I appreciate your listening. Happy New Year, friends.
You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.